Thank you for watching this presentation, Pollinator Pathway and Native Bees of Central Oregon. I'm Laurel Westendorf. I'm part of the Community Relations team at the Deschutes Public Library. Every month we explore a theme, and this month's theme is wild. Our presenters are Basey Klopp. She's the founding member of the all-volunteer group, the Bend Pollinator Pathway. It's the first native pollinator habitat connectivity project in our region. In 2014, Basey received a grant to install a public native pollinator garden, partnering with the city of Bend. And she's continued to grow pollinator habitat around town with native plants. We also have with us Toni Stephan. She's the Horticulture and Small Farms Instructor at the OSU Deschutes County Extension Office. Toni primarily assists with the Master Gardener program, but she also works with the pollinators for the Oregon Bee Atlas, which is part of the Oregon Bee Project. Thank you both so much for shedding some light on our pollinators and how we can help them this year.
First and foremost, thank you, Laurel, and thank you to the Deschutes Public Library for hosting the Bend Pollinator Pathway as part of the No Wild series. I am thrilled to be here to introduce to our community a new endeavor that is launching in town this spring. And I'm going to speak for a few minutes to provide a brief overview of the Bend Pollinator Pathway, why it's needed now more than ever, and how to become part of it. And then one of our committee members, Toni Stephan, will, as Laurel mentioned, will share a presentation on native bees of Central Oregon, some of whom are still being identified by the work of the volunteers with the Oregon Bee Atlas, of which Toni is a part. The goal of a pollinator pathway is to establish and connect native pollinator-friendly habitats and food sources for bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and other pollinating insects and wildlife. And we do this by creating a corridor of contiguous native pollinator gardens throughout our community, using adjacent lands of residents, businesses, parks, open spaces, and more. As you can imagine, many of our native pollinators are small and thus only capable of foraging within a limited area from where they nest. So we need to ensure that there are plenty of native plants and pesticide-free places within that zone for the pollinators to thrive. We are incredibly lucky here in Central Oregon to be rich in pollinator diversity. Between them, we have hundreds of species of native butterflies, moths, and bees. Of course, we have hummingbirds, some year-round, beetles, flies, and bats. And for a small glimpse into the variety of pollinators that can be attracted to local native habitat, all of the photographs in my presentation were taken in my yard in Bend. I live on a third of an acre, about 1.5 miles from the downtown public library. And full disclosure, I am not a photographer, but I aspire to become better at documenting the pollinators in my yard. And all of these photos were taken with just the camera on my phone. By now, many people are aware of the troubles facing the honeybee, and more recently in the news, even the western monarch butterflies. But less well known is that all of our pollinators are currently facing extremely challenging circumstances as a result of habitat loss, pesticide use, invasive species, climate change, and disease. Of all of these drivers, habitat loss is the #1 reason for pollinator decline. In the past century alone, the continental US has lost 150 million acres of habitat and farmland to urban sprawl, and that trend is not decreasing. In its place, we've built cities, towns, and a monoculture of 40 million acres of manicured lawns. The remaining isolated pockets of natural areas are not large enough to support wildlife. In fact, worldwide, over 40% of insect species are currently threatened with extinction. That is the bad news. The good news is that there is something that everyone can do to reverse this trend. We can create habitat that is friendly for native pollinators. Much like a rising tide lifts all boats, when we plant native gardens, either in containers on a balcony or on a large piece of acreage, we create habitat for many other beneficiaries. For those of us who love birds as well, a recent study in North America discovered that it takes over 6,000 caterpillars to raise one brood of chickadees. That is an astonishing number for just one family of birds. So providing habitat for butterflies to lay their eggs will result not only in their success, but in the successful rearing of another generation of birds. There are 5 steps to creating ideal pollinator habitat. This can be done at home or at the office, individually or with a group of neighbors or friends, on porches, on balconies. If you plant it, they will come. The number one thing to do is to plant native plants. Native plants are those that evolved in our region along with our pollinators and provide the pollen, nectar, nesting sites, and shelter that our local bees and butterflies require to feed and reproduce. Native plants offer food for both the adult stage of their lives and food and shelter for their young, like eggs and caterpillars. If you have the space to grow multiple plants, plant for continuous bloom. Add early, mid, and late season blooming flowers so that a wider variety of pollinators and those whose life cycles occur at different times during our growing season will be able to use the plants. Also, plant in blocks of similar species. Recently, scientists have learned that it's best to group similar species together rather than interspersing them, because big blocks of color or scent can make it easier for the pollinators to find the flowers that they need most and return to them. And just one word of caution here. Often nursery plants are touted as eco-friendly because they are drought tolerant. And while water savings is absolutely critical in the high desert, many of these plants can be inedible to our local wildlife, including pollinators. So if one of your gardening goals is xeriscaping, that's fantastic. It's absolutely compatible. Just choose drought tolerant natives over exotics. Second thing is to go pesticide free. This is self-evident. Pesticides kill insects. That's what they're designed to do. And our goal is to protect the pollinators. Number 3, provide water. If you have never seen a bee take a drink of water, you are in for a real treat. Bird baths work well, or a shallow plant dish, but make sure to put a rock inside so that the bees can access the water without falling in. Number 4, create nesting habitat. If you have already completed step 1, this step is easy. Just remember to leave the leaves, save the stems, and embrace bare ground. Allow nature to overwinter as it intended. You can still rake your leaves if you want to clear any grass you may have, but keep the leaves on site in a pile in an out-of-the-way corner of the yard, or put them on your garden plants, or mulch your trees and shrubs with them, but please do not shred them. If all is going according to plan, these leaves will have butterfly or moth eggs on them, and they will provide a warm blanket for bumblebee queens who nest over winter underneath the surface of the soil. As for the stems, just leave them too. I know that cleaning up the garden in fall can be a hard habit to break, but plants are more protected from cold winter temperatures if they are not trimmed back. They provide shelter for birds and small mammals. And when spring finally comes, you can trim the stems to heights between 8 and 24 inches to accommodate a variety of different stem nesting bees. The bees will lay eggs this season and then overwinter into next to emerge the following spring. So allow these stems to stand for at least 2 springs. 70% of native bees nest in the ground, and they require access to the surface of the soil. So embrace the bare ground and eschew bark dust and bark mulch. If you see small holes in the soil near the base of plants or bunch grasses, you may even catch a glimpse of a bee entering or exiting the nest through these holes. And rethink the lawn. If you have turf grass in your yard, consider using organic practices like leaving the grass clippings after mowing and mowing less often in season, as your grass might be harboring pollinators and their eggs. Any ways that you can adapt your lawn to being more climate friendly will also be a boost for the pollinators, like using a manual push mower or an electric mower instead of gasoline. And to borrow from Marie Kondo, you might ask yourself, does my lawn spark joy? And if not, why not remove some grass to make room for more flowers, trees, and shrubs? The Bend Pollinator Pathway is a volunteer-led, community-wide endeavor and would love your participation. Whether you are planting at home or can join us for planting parties in public spaces around town, we will have COVID-friendly measures in place this season for sure. There are plenty of volunteer opportunities with the pathway, from fall seed collection to growing and fostering plants from native seed to distribute to other members of our community. You can also purchase one of these yard medallions to display in your habitat. And please join the Facebook group to learn more about upcoming events and opportunities for involvement. The Bend Pollinator Pathway will thrive with your participation. Thank you very much. And I'm going to pass this over to Toni and her presentation on native bees of Central Oregon. Thank you, Toni.
All right, so I'm Toni Stephan. I work at the Deschutes County Extension Office, and my primary job is working with the public and answering questions about garden problems, as well as working with master gardeners in the plant clinic office. Here I have a young, aspiring master gardener. And then my secondary job, or a smaller portion of my job, is working with the Oregon Bee Atlas and investigating native bees in our area. I am the co-team leader, and right here, the lady in the hat is Heike Williams. She is my co-leader. So the Oregon Bee Atlas is an initiative between the Oregon Department of Agriculture, the Oregon Department of Forestry, and Oregon State University Extension Pollinator Health Program. This really started in about 2018. That's when we very first started to collect bees. And this initiative is supported by funds from the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, Pollinator Health Fund, as well as USDA NIFA grants, and of course, donations from many Oregonians who love bees. The mission for this Oregon Bee Atlas is that they're going to train master melitologists, citizen scientists. They give us equipment, and with this training equipment, we help create and maintain a collection of bees for the OSU arthropod collection, which is accessible to the public. We also educate Oregonians on the state's biodiversity, such as giving this presentation. And then we are going to survey, or we are in the process, and will continue to survey the state's bees to form a baseline of who's here and who we might be losing. So there's lots of different pollinators. We all know that birds and bats and butterflies and moths, as well as beetles and flies, are pollinators, but the best of them really are bees. The reason for this is that while other pollinators accidentally collect pollen, bees do it on purpose. And they are designed to collect pollen. So here we see on the right-hand side, a little bee. This bee is really very small. She's about 4 millimeters, but you can see the individual pollen grains on her legs and a little bit on her abdomen and so forth. This is dry pollen that she collects, and then she will eventually take this back home with her. Some bees, like honeybees and bumblebees, like the one on the bottom left here, actually mix pollen and nectar together, and they pack it up on this little spot in their back legs or hind legs called the corbicula. And then bees are specialized for collecting pollens. The bee up on the upper left, you can see kind of her legs are all yellow. Well, that's pollen that's collected in the hair that she's packed into those hairs that are specially designed to transfer pollen from place to place. So bees aren't necessarily purposely pollinating. They're collecting pollen. And while they collect the pollen, they're going from flower to flower, and they pick up pollen from one flower and drop it off on the stigma, which is the female part of another flower, and this fertilizes that flower. But their role is not really purposely pollinating, they're purposely collecting pollen. So what's a bee? How do you identify a bee if you're out in your own garden? Well, bees have certain characteristics. They have 2 pairs of wings. They have pollen collecting hairs somewhere on their body, some of them more than others. And they have long segmented antennae, and they have thick back legs. So in this picture on this screen, you can see 2 bees and 2 non-bees. So the 2 bees are here and here, and the 2 non-bees here and here. On this upper left, you might see that this insect probably only has 1 pair of wings. Here's a wing here, and here's a wing from the other side. We can't see a second wing, so we could think it probably has 1 pair of wings. It's kind of hairy, so you could mistake it for a bee, but it has really short antennae. They're not long and segmented, and it's got what we call kind of chicken legs. It's got skinny little legs. So we know this is not a bee. In fact, this is a fly. On the other insect over here is a wasp. We can kind of assume it probably has 2 pairs of wings, this long forewing, but underneath you can kind of see the shadow of the hind wing. So it's got 4 wings, 2 pair. It also has not very much hair, if it has any hair at all. It has long segmented antennae though, but here again, these back legs are chicken legs. They're really skinny. So we know that this is not a bee, and in fact, this is a wasp. This one actually has a very thin, long, thin waist. Even though bees do have a thin waist, it's not nearly as long. So these are bees, this is a fly, this is a wasp. We all kind of grew up thinking that Winnie the Pooh knew what a bee nest was. Well, he didn't. This is not how bees nest. In fact, no bee makes an aerial hive like this. This is actually the hive of a wasp or a hornet. Bees, even honeybees, if left to their own, to find their own place, will nest in things like hollowed out trees and rock cavities, and even, unfortunately, in the spaces between the walls of your houses sometimes. So if you see an aerial nest like this, understand it is not a bee nest, but instead a wasp nest, and you want to stay away from it. So here we have a bumblebee nest. I'll go quickly over this, don't want to spend too much time, but you can see up in the upper left, there's a bumblebee. This is a spring bee. She's already been mated female. She's going to come out in the spring, and then she's going to go get some pollen and nectar, kind of get herself some energy, and then she's going to look for a new place to start her own nest. Bumblebees often nest in like old abandoned rodent nests, under wood piles, in rock piles, and so forth. She'll start off by making a little bit of a honey pot, which is kind of reserved for emergencies only, and then she'll start laying eggs. She actually puts a little pollen loaf down for these eggs, and she lays on top of them, and she'll shake herself and keep them warm. And then you can see that eventually these eggs start to hatch, or actually the eggs hatched became larvae. The larvae have now gone through all of their instars and pupated, and now they're coming out to be little bumblebee workers. The workers now go out and do the work, and the queen will stay home and just continue to lay eggs. The workers live probably about 6 weeks or so, and they just cycle new workers, new workers, new workers all through the summer. Eventually, by fall, which is the top up here, the colony produces males and new queens. The new queens are mated by the males. The entire colony dies except for the newly mated queens, and they start over again in the fall by the fertilized queens going off on their own, finding a safe place to overwinter, and starting the cycle the next year again. So that's a bumblebee, and she is most typical of a honeybee, or closest to the honeybee that we have here. Remember, honeybees are not native to North America, so their perennial hive system is not normal for our bees at all. 70% of our native bees are actually ground nesters. Basey already talked about this, so I'm going to go quickly over this. But they'll find a place in the ground. That's why we really need to leave some bare ground around. One single female will dig a hole, and depending on what type of bee she is, she'll create several cavities, put a pollen loaf, and lay an egg on that loaf. And then she'll do another and another and another, depending upon her resources. And in about 6 weeks or so, she'll be done. She'll die. The prodigy that she has laid will remain there, maturing until the next year when they are adults and they dig their way out of this hole and start the cycle all over again. The other 30% of our native bees are cavity nesters. Here on the left, you see a blackberry stem, which I found last year. I actually planted. I took some clippings of blackberry stems and the spring before planted them. By that, I mean I just stuck them in the ground. And last year, I found one of these stems looked to be inhabited, and I split it open, and I found these small carpenter bees preparing to exit. So they had used this stem. On the right-hand side, you can see this is probably a mason bee. This one is not my photo. So based on what looks to be mud, I'm saying this is a mason bee. You can see on the far right where she has laid a pollen loaf and put an egg on that. She is now closing that cell off because she gives every single one of her children its own bedroom. And she does this all by herself. She gives them all their own food. And then after about 6 weeks and she's done, she too dies and never meets her children. So when we look at bees to identify them, first we have to sex them. That means we count either the segments of their antenna or the number of sections they have in their abdomen. A male bee will have 13 segments in his antenna and a female 12. And a male bee will have 7 sections in their abdomen and a female will have 6. After we sex our bees, then we can start saying, okay, what kind of bee is this? And the wing is really an important first step. The wing tells us a lot. This first area, this top thing is your marginal cell, and underneath that, you can see these 3 cells here. These are called submarginal cells. So depending on the type of bee it is, it'll have anywhere from 1 to 3 submarginal cells. Most of our bees in Central Oregon, in Oregon period, will have 2 or 3 submarginal cells. Then you can see this area where these 2 arrows are pointing to. This is a particular vein, and the pattern of this particular vein is sometimes quite telling about the bee. In fact, this pattern itself, right here, kind of forms kind of a quasi-S shape. So this automatically tells me, just by looking at this one feature on this wing, that this bee belongs to the family Calididae. And over on this bee wing, you can see how this vein has a particular pattern of going down straight and then taking a hard hook down So it's going kind of down easy, and then it hooks hard down into this next vein. And that's very telltale of the family Halictidae. So sometimes we can figure out a bee just by the wing pattern. I've got this little video of the bumblebee that I'd like to play for you. Sorry, it's kind of goofy audio there, but I was just kind of going on the fly as I made that little video. Anyway, so now that we saw a bumblebee in action, let's take a look at some of the bumblebees that you're going to see in your backyard here in Central Oregon. These are what I consider maybe the earliest bumblebees out and about here. The one on the left, Bombus vosnesensky, is, as Basey said, the yellow-faced bumblebee. You can see her face is yellow, her top of her head and shoulders are yellow, and then she's black all the way back to almost her rear end, and then she has another yellow or maybe a pale white stripe. This is a fairly large bee, not the biggest of our bumblebees, but a queen can probably get 3/4 of an inch in size. She's a pretty good sized girl. And on the right, you see Bombus huntii. We've got a lot of, maybe not a lot, we've got several bees that have a color pattern sort of like this, and you could easily get them confused. But if you take a look at her abdomen, you'll notice that she's yellow and then she's orange. Actually, there's 2 sections of orange and then yellow again, followed by 2 sections of black. This identifies her as Bombus huntii. She's quite a bit smaller than Vase over on the left. She probably gets, as a queen, maybe a 1/2 inch, maybe 5/8, but not quite as big as Vase over here. The next 2 bumblebees are Bombus nevadensis. You can see that she has this very black patch on the top of her back. And she's got, if we could see better, sorry for the little fuzziness of the picture, she's got a very, very long face. And she's probably our largest bumblebee here in Central Oregon. She's very similar to this bee over here, Bombus morsoni, who does not have that black patch on her back, and she's got a short face. The thing about Bombus morsoni is that she is on what's called the nearly threatened list for the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List. So basically what this means is that her area of range is getting smaller, and there are getting fewer and fewer of this bumblebee within the range that she's in. Now, she likes the dry side of the mountains, so we see her quite frequently, but not nearly as often as she used to be seen. This bumblebee is the western bumblebee. It used to be the most common bumblebee in Oregon, and she is no longer that way because speculation is that the greenhouse trade, tomato trade, when they brought in bumblebees, those bumblebees had a pathogen that wiped out a particular group of bumblebees, and this bee, the Bombus occidentalis, is among that group. And so we're seeing her numbers decline. This is a photo I took a couple years ago. She's actually on rabbit brush. We do see a few of them here, but again, her range is definitely smaller and definitely fewer within that range. So here's a little picture, video of a bumblebee in action. I think she's probably buzz pollinating this rose, but if there's any kids watching today, I was hoping they would enjoy this. Whoops, it didn't play. Well, we'll just pass that one up, sorry. So within the family Apidae, which bumblebees are part of, we also have this group of Anthophora. These are really fast bees. They're very fast flyers, and the males are very territorial. In fact, I've seen males doing aerial battles with each other, maybe 4 or 5 males together, and they get into this clump and they just kind of fall to the ground, wrestling each other to see who's going to get the girl, I guess. So this beautiful picture on the left was taken by Pete Peterson. He's one of our Atlas members here in Central Oregon. This is the Anthophora getting pollen off of Rocky Mountain bee plant. And I just put the photo on the right so you can kind of see the size of some of the Anthophoras. Basically, there's a size range. But these are a pretty good sized bee. They can go anywhere from, I think, probably about, maybe just a little bit over 1/4 inch to maybe 1/2 inch. This one's measured in centimeters, and you can see she's probably about 13 or 14 centimeters in length. Continuing the family Apidae, this is one of a bee that we refer commonly as a longhorn bee. You can see how long those antennae are. In the male, this male Eucera, those antennae can go about halfway, all the way halfway up to his to half of its abdomen. That's what I'm trying to say, sorry. Eucera are ground nesters, and there's lots of generalists. That means that they feed on a lot of different kinds of plants. Notice on this male, he has a lot of yellow on his face, and he's kind of a funky looking bee. Typically, males look kind of funny looking, and they have a lot of yellow on their face quite frequently. So that's another way that you can sort of tell a male bee from a female bee. A couple more longhorn bees, again in the family Apidae. The one on the left is again another male. I believe he's probably going to be in the genus Melisodes, though I can't prove that, but that's my guess. He was rather a small bee, and he was out in July, so that's way too late for males of Eucera, and he's pretty small, so I'm going to call him a Melisodes. The bee on the right is another longhorn, and you can see how beautiful this bee is. You'll see these bees on Asteraceae plants a lot, like daisies and echinacea, and in the fall, sunflowers are some of their very favorites. But this is one of these very, very fuzzy, almost, bee-looking like bees, and she is in the genus, I believe, Silvestra. I think this is going to be the last photo of Apidae. This is what we call a small carpenter bee. She's in the genus Ceratina. This is the kind of bee. In fact, the two bees on the right in my palm were two of the bees in that blackberry stem. You can see they're not very big. They're black. They're not very hairy. They're kind of gunmetal black or shiny black. They're not very hairy. They're not great pollinators because they don't have a lot of hair to carry pollen in, but still important little bees at the same time. I think they're pretty, once you start recognizing a Ceratina, they're pretty easy to see. In fact, you can see on this female, a photo by Pete, You can see this kind of up and down dash. That shows that she's a female. And if you could see this photo a little bit better, this bee right here actually has kind of the 5-gallon hat white spot, the shape of a 5-gallon hat. That makes him a male. That's the male marking. So these are pretty fun little bees and pretty easy to distinguish in your own yard. They're very much generalists, so they're going to be in all kinds of on all kinds of different plants. There's another little video. Let's see if I can make this play. I don't have my little player here. Oh. So you can see this what I believe is a spastra. Right now she's digging pollen, or she's gathering pollen on her front legs. You can see it on her middle legs also. She'll eventually, stop for a drink of nectar and then get back busy to collecting that pollen. Eventually she'll gather all the pollen on her body and push it to her back legs, where then she'll carry it off to the hive. Now I can't get it to go forward. There we go. So the next family is the Megachilidae, which really are the leaf cutters. And everybody, just about everybody, has seen leaf cutter, what they call damage, in their yard. The leaf cutters will take little snips, little oval snips out of plant leaves, like roses, even rose petals, lilac leaves, raspberries, blackberries. They take little oval snips out of the leaf, and the female will carry this back to her cavity, because she's a cavity dweller, and again provision every single one of her eggs its own room, its own space within that cavity. On the left, you can see this bee is a female. If you look at her abdomen, you can see all those yellow hairs on the bottom of her abdomen. And she's got some hairs on her legs. You can see some yellow on the back of her leg, or her hind legs, I'm sorry. But she'll carry the pollen on her belly. And this family, all the bees carry pollen on their belly. On the left, you see a male leafcutter bee. I found this bee, I collected this bee in my friend Helen's yard, so I refer to it as Helen's bee. But if you take a look at its front legs, you can see those beautiful white muffs on the forearms there. Pretty interesting what these muffs are for. Not only does he look like he's all dressed up, ready to go to the ball, but during mating, he will take his forearms and he'll bat the female on the head with these beautiful muffs. And the guess is that it's a distraction to during mating, so that the female, I guess, doesn't fly off or something. These are just gorgeous bees. More bees in the family Megachilidae. Many people have seen bees of this genus Osmia. Osmia lignaria is the blue orchard mason bee, which I know a lot of people in Central Oregon really would like to have, because these are managed bees actually, and you can put out little tubes or bee blocks and potentially get these bees and rear them up. But so far, last year we put out about 160 blocks looking for Osmia lignaria, the blue orchard mason bee. And as far as I know, we only had one person that actually got Osmia lignaria to use those blocks. We do, however, have a lot of other types of mason bees. This bee on the right is called Osmia montana. Look at her choppers. If you take a look at the front of her face, right here are her mandibles. And that's what she uses to gather leaves or mud or whatever it is. I don't know how she nests, other than I know she's a cavity nester. I don't know what she uses in her nest, but I'm guessing it must be some big old leaf because she's got some big choppers. Notice on both these bees, the bottom of their belly has got hair. In fact, this one's got pollen in the hairs, and look at these hairs on her belly. So that's where they carry their hairs. This bee right here was collected here in Central Oregon by one of our Atlas members, Gretchen Peterson. And here are two others that were collected. These are still osmias, collected by people in the Central Oregon Bee Atlas team. This little bee is about 6 or 7 millimeters long. Look at that beautiful blue metallic color. Just a gorgeous and cute little bee. On this bee, Osmia densa here, was collected again by Pete. And this bee is about 10 millimeters. So you can tell they're small to medium size-ish bees. They're not huge bees. And then the still in the family Megachilidae leaf cutters. There's just a couple of different genera of that family. The Hoplites looks very similar to mason bees, yet it is not. On the one on the right, this little Ashmediella, I just love these bees. Look at the size of the head of that little bee compared to the rest of its body. It's got a huge head. These little bees actually live in kind of decaying wood. I think I like this bee so much because the abdomen reminds me of chocolate. So this is probably one of my favorite bees. But and this one was collected along the Deschutes River right there in the Old Mill District, just up the dog park where there's that river walk. So this bee was collected there. On to another family, Andrenidae, or called the mining bees. This is the genus Andrena. There's a large grouping of Andrena around here. These are early bees. Most of them are early. They come out early in the spring, and then some of them do go later on into the summer. This particular bee right here is what I believe to be, I have a tentative ID on this, the Andrena astragali, which is the only bee that we know can actually collect and use the pollen off the death camas plant. Okay, remember the death camas is toxic to livestock and people as well, and so you want to be very careful with it. It seems to be toxic to insects also, because this bee has special adaptations where she seems to be the only bee that can use the pollen from that. And then we take a look at this, and she's about, I would say, 10 millimeters, maybe a little bit more than 10, 12 millimeters in length. So she's a decent sized bee. And I think she's just absolutely stunning. When you see this bee in real life, she is just golden, 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 and just a beautiful bee. One of the tiniest bees that we have is in the genus Perdita. In fact, our taxonomist in the Bee Atlas calls these pretty tiny bees or fairy bees. And so one of their favorite plants and most used plants is rabbit brush. So rabbit brush is a really important native to our native bees. This bee right here is 4 millimeters. We can see here's 1, 2, 3, and if I stretch her out, she'd probably hit here. So she's 4 millimeters. That's twice as big as the tiniest Perdita, which the smallest bee, Perdita minima, is the smallest bee in the United States. So here I have a little video of the last Andrena I'm going to show. This is a pretty unusual bee. She's kind of a medium-sized bee, And here you can see she's going around this California poppy, another native. She's just collecting pollen as fast as she can, and then she's off. Got it. And then some of the most jeweled or most colorful bees that you'll see in your yard are from the genus Agapostemon. You'll see these bees looking green, very green, and these two bees look almost bluish. This is the female on the left, and the male of this particular genus and species or species on the right. Now I want to bring your attention to the labels on these bees. This is how we catalog and process, prepare the bees for the Oregon Bee Atlas. You can see there's a top label on the bee on the right has a top label, which gives the location where it was collected. It gives the date that it was collected, who collected it, and also the GPS coordinates. Then there's a second label underneath here. It's called a determination label. That means that the Bee Atlas member did his best to determine what genus this bee was in. And then a third label on the bottom is from our expert bee taxonomist, Lincoln Best, that works with the Oregon Bee Atlas. And he confirmed that this is, yes, Agapostemon texanus. And this one is a male, and the one on the left is a female. So that's our process for cataloging these bees. I think this is the last family I'm going to share with you, the genus Halictus. The family Halictidae. Most of the bees that you're going to see around are from this family, but you won't even notice they're bees. You'll probably think they're gnats or they're little tiny flies or something else, because a lot of these are really, really small. Some of them are not so small. The Agapostemon that we just talked about is also in this family. So the genus Halictus, what's cool about it is that we identify it based on where the stripes are. And remember that bee wing that I told you about that had the strong hook down? Well, this is the family of bees that has that. And so this we know is Halictus because it had that strong hook in its wing, and it has the white bands on the very outside edge of these abdominal segments. Whereas the next bee, let's see if we can switch to it really fast. This is in the family Halictidae, but this one's Lasioglossum. If you notice, the hair is on this part of the tergite right here, which is called the base of the tergite. So it starts here. So the Halictus would have hair here, but it's actually on the Lasioglossum, comes from underneath this terga. And I know that seems really kind of hard, and it is hard to see. Here you see that hook basal vein. It tells me that it is, in fact, a Halictidae. This one was collected at Eagle Crest along the river there. And it is Lasioglossum in the genus Lasioglossum. The cool thing about this genus Lasioglossum is that it's the catch-all for bees that I guess that we don't really know where they go anymore. Bees that used to be in separate genera of their own are now in the genus Lasioglossum, and they're considered subgenera of Lasioglossum. So if we take a look at this photo, you'll see what I'm talking about. This little bee is a Lasioglossum, but it is in the subgenus Dialictus. This is one of my very favorite photos from last year that I was able to take. This is a bee on the native Dusty Maiden, native to Central Oregon that I know of. The flower botanical name is Schnactus douglasii, variety douglasii. And it's not a very big flower, and it's made up of multiple flowers, or the flower head is made up of multiple flowers. So you can tell this is really a very tiny bee. This bee is probably about, I would guess, maybe 4 millimeters. I love this picture right here because you can see the wings. This bee is just about ready to take off, and I just caught her wings as she was in flight, just about going to go in flight. So Basey did talk about some of the floral resources. She talked about having spring flowers, which these two are here. Willows, though they're wind pollinated, are super, super important for our spring bees because they give a pollen resource and a little bit of nectar resource for the bees as they're first coming out. The bottom is Oregon grape, another native to Oregon. The next three pictures right here are kind of summer blooms, the Oregon sunshine, penstemons, really important flowers for bees, and the fern bush on the upper right. And then, as I've already said, rabbit brush is so important for bees in the fall because it's one of the few blooming plants that we have in the fall, and everybody is using rabbit brush. So if you can plant native plants in your yard somewhere in your landscape, that's really important. However, remember, a lot of our bees and a lot of our generalists. So they don't necessarily have to have native plants, but so many of our native bees are specialists, which do require native plants. When you plant flowers or flowering plants, it's okay to have non-natives because a lot of those generalists will use these plants too. And as Basey said, you want to plant in large groupings, large clumps. Remember, I told you that the mother bee is solitary and she does all the work. So the less distance she has to travel from flower to flower, the better she is able to provide pollen for her brood and the bigger broods she can produce. So I just want to leave you with one last thing. If you're interested at all in becoming a master melittologist, you can go to the Oregon Bee Atlas website. That is extension.oregonstate.edu/bee-atlas. And you'll find this button right here that says becoming a certified master melittologist, and you can sign up. Now, I know that March 1st is going to be the deadline for this year. So you'll be seeing this presentation after March 1st. So anybody adding your name to this list after this presentation will be on for 2022. Again, the same website, extension.oregonstate.edu/B-atlas. At the down further on the menu down here, you can find a donate button. And as I told you earlier in this presentation, we are funded by grants and kind donations from bee enthusiasts within the state and anybody who wants to actually. On this is where you would find a donate button. We're really looking for that large donor who would set us up and be able to form a foundation for the Bee Atlas, but we will take all donations that we can. So if you're interested in donating to a worthy cause of studying the bees within Oregon, then certainly we would appreciate any help we can get, and any donation would be gladly accepted. I want to thank you all for being part of this presentation and watching this presentation. That's all I have for you at this point in time. So thank you very much. Stop sharing.
And thank you, Basey and Toni, so much for sharing about our pollinators and how we can help them. I think that a lot of people are going to be excited to see how many bees we have here in this area, and that less is kind of more when it comes to gardening and leaving things and habitat for the plants, uh, habitat of the plants so that the bees can prosper. So thank you both, and until next time, I guess.